Welcome, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the background music and didn't put you to sleep after a heavy lunch. Thank you so much for joining the event on a Friday afternoon. As you all know, the intent of this event is to demystify how top companies, top engineering companies, or your dream companies interview candidates for engineering. Hopefully, unlike a lot of Zoom meetings that y'all sit in, this one is fruitful for you and actually will help you land your dream job and help you prepare better and understand the thought process behind the interviewers in most of the biggest companies in the world, which includes Meta, Google, LinkedIn, Microsoft, and many, many more. Awesome. Without further ado, the agenda for today is very simple. We're going to have three discussions. Two of them are technical in nature. One is focused on the human-centric approach of the whole interviewing aspect at all of these companies. Finally, we close out with an interactive Q&A session, which will help you deep dive into anything that you want to ask more from our esteemed panelists. Some housekeeping rules. For any questions during the session, please use the Q&A tab, which is at the end or the bottom of your webinar. If you just scroll or hover over, you should be able to see that. We have a moderator as well who would be looking at the questions and keeping note of them so that we can address them at the end. Now, to kick off our session, we're going to start with the first element of it, which is cracking the code. We have two absolutely fabulous people, Pawan Shankar and Deepika Agarwal. Pawan is an engineer at Google who specializes in building scalable and robust systems with expertise in distributed computing and innovative solutions for global challenges. And Deepika is a software engineer with LinkedIn. She excels in crafting cutting-edge platforms to enhance user experience and drive seamless connectivity for millions of professionals worldwide. So over to the both of you and hope each and every one of you have a good session.
Yeah, thanks Sherin for setting the stage for us. Hi everyone, I'm Deepika. Today, I and Pawan will share our experience of interviewing the candidates, especially in the coding round in our respective organization. While many of the candidates we interview came from the very good academic background, we observe they have the excellent problem solving and the coding skills, despite they struggle to clear the interviews. So we have noticed there are a few minor gaps with a little bit of mentorship could make a big difference. So today we are here to discuss these a few of these gaps and how to address them so that it can help you all in succeeding in the upcoming interview rounds. So let's get started. Before starting, I have a question from all of you. So Devika, can you start a poll? Yeah, so the question is when you start solving a coding problem in an interview, what is the first thing you usually do? Do you ask clarify questions, you jump to the coding, you write the pseudocode, or you think about the edge cases? Oh, I already started getting responses. Okay, here we have the result of the poll. So most of you have nailed this right. You start by asking the clarifying questions. Yeah, that sounds good to me. So let's get started. So this is the first thing I want to start with because this set the stage for a problem solving round, especially in the coding interviews. So whenever, as an interviewer, I have observed that many of the candidates, whenever the interviewer is sharing the problem statement, and since most of the candidates have practiced so many questions before appearing for the interview, they might have heard about the problem statement and they get excited and they miss hearing some of the parts of the problem statement itself. For example, let's take the example, a very common example, which most of you have resolved in the past, I'm sure. There is an array of integers and you have to return the two integers which sum up to a particular target. Now, this is the classic version of the problem. One of the common change which the interviewer can do is instead of returning the two numbers, return the indexes of two numbers or maybe something else. So when you start, most of the candidates start hearing this problem in the start, they they miss to hear this important change, and they start discussing the solution, they start coding the solution, and after a few minutes they realize this is not the expectation of the interviewer is. So I think it is very important to understand what the problem statement is, and in order to be sure of that you understand the problem right, I think it would be good if you can reiterate the problem in your own words to the interviewer and confirm your understanding. So this is what my experience while interviewing at LinkedIn. Pawan, do you also observe the similar thing at Google?
Yes, Deepika. I see a lot of interviewers making this mistake where, they look at probably the first sentence of the problem and then start thinking of solutions to it, whereas the constraints of a problem may be different. The scenario that may be like the base story, maybe usually when you get a coding problem, there will be some story behind it, and then there will be something asked of it. So, uh, sometimes candidates don't look at what is the entire problem statement. And also another thing is, usually few of the companies, sometimes interviewers do give some sample input output. That also helps clarify what the problem is exactly trying to achieve. Like for a given input, what is the expected output? Candidates either miss this, or even if that is not given, that is something the candidate should do when they get a problem, so that they can confirm their understanding is correct. That is the easiest way, as in programming, that given an input, if you have multiple such examples of input and output combination, it's very easy to clear all your problem doubts around the problem, rather than reading through the text part of it. uh, and as you rightly pointed out, summarizing the problem in your own words also helps. And when you're talking about summarizing, the next thing I also see during the interviews is that once the candidate understand the problem, then they will be thinking of the solution. They don't communicate it. They don't understand. They don't describe what solution they are thinking, or they may be trying out multiple things in their head. But the interviewer has no way to understand that what's exactly going on candidate's head. So it would always be better to express your thoughts. What that helps in is, even if you are going in a wrong direction due to some wrong assumptions you might have made, the interviewer can guide you that no, that is not true, and that is why your solution won't work, or something like that. What are your thoughts on this, Deepika?
Yeah, very rightly said, Pawan. This is the really, the most important problem I have seen in the interviews, that the candidates don't express what they are thinking. So, as an interviewer, our intent is always to hire the candidates and to help them in the best possible way. We should know what they are thinking, and without they are communicating, we can't judge like what they are doing actually. And let me share with you one of the important expected LinkedIn specifically, that here we don't score the candidate based on the accuracy of the solution. That is one of the expect, but that's not the only aspect of scoring the candidate. The score is also dependent on how they are approaching the problem. And to understand how they are approaching the problem, communication is the key skill which each candidate should take care while having appearing in the interview. So not only the accuracy of the solution, but how they are thinking, what approach they are taking, so that we can help them out. That is also important. But along with this point, I also want to emphasize on that communicating effectively doesn't always mean that candidate have to continue speaking for the whole 45 minutes, or let's say 35 minutes, whatever the duration of the interview is. There has to be a balance, and it's on the candidate to have that balance. It's okay to ask the interviewer that give me 5 minutes to consolidate my thought, to think about the problem. And once you have the consolidated thought process, then you can start communicating that okay, this is the solution which I'm thinking. Another thing which I want to emphasize here, uh, in continuation with this point only, that just to communicate throughout the round, the candidates, the most important, the most common mistake which the candidate do is they start with a brute force solution. So they spend the time is very restricted in the coding interviews, and they spend 15-20 minutes in discussing about the brute force solution, despite knowing that there exists a better solution to this problem. So that's not always necessary to start with a brute force approach, especially in case of the experienced candidates, I feel. So if you know the brute force solution, it's okay. Just share one line about that. But if you know a better solution than that, it's better to spend time on that, to discuss that better solution and to code that better solution. Whatever best you know at that point of time, I recommend that we should code that solution instead of starting with the brute force or the simple solution first. So there could be different flavors of the questions that that the candidate get. There could be a simple problem for which directly jumping onto the best solution is the right way. There could be difficult problems as well for which candidate have not seen in the past. So in that case, starting with a brute force approach and slowly optimizing it by observing that okay, this is the area where I can optimize or not. That makes sense. But the right judgment should be made at that time by the candidate that where at what solution I should spend my time on because the time is limited. So what's your thought about this, Pavan?
Yeah, definitely, Deepika. Like the time is something that the candidate has to keep in mind when proposing the solution. One thing to keep in mind is you are being interviewed by software engineers. They also know the brute force solution, and there are algorithms that can solve the problem. So if you are aware, it would be better to start with the algorithms. So it will save time, and it also showcases your knowledge on those algorithms. Uh, when talking about this, there is also a flip side to it where you may end up overcomplicating the problem. That's uh, not what is actually asked. It also goes back to, the first step where we talked about lack of problem understanding, right? Sometimes we look at the problem, we get excited that we have already seen in the past, and we may end up going into the some complex solutions, whereas the problem may be a sub problem to what you have actually seen, and it may be a very simple one because the interviewer may want to build it up on something else. Or the other mindset is, okay, I'm interviewing with a big product company, they ask difficult questions, so if they have asked a problem, the solution should have graphs or some dynamic programming. That's a wrong mindset, I would say, to go for an interview with. Yes, you should know all these algorithms, but you should focus on what is actually the interviewer asking, and don't try to fit in all the complex algorithms unnecessarily. Uh, Deepika, have you seen such instances?
Yeah, many a times. I think half of the interviews which I took on the day-to-day basis, this is the problem. So I think there is a stereotype if yeah, among the candidates, among the interviewees, that if you are interviewing for the Meta, Google, LinkedIn, these big product company, they always ask difficult problems. No, that's not the case. There could be the problem could be drafted in a in the indirect sentences, but that's also the part of the problem solving. That's also the part of the judging criteria, that how you analyze the problem. But the answer could be very simple as sorting an array, as simple as searching in an array. So the candidate should practice enough to understand that what the problem statement is actually, think about it, and start thinking from the analytical. So that comes from the practice, I would say, that start thinking analytically. Okay, could arrays could be the solution? Does it require sorting? Is it a string problem? Or it require some iterations in the limited minimum number of steps. So in that case, the depth first search or the breadth first search, these could be the right solution. So thinking in that sequential manner could help in avoiding overcomplicating the problem. So now we have discussed like when the interview start, understand the problem rightly, communicate your thought process in the right manner, think about the solutions in an analytical way, start solving it, focus on, first discussing the solution, then on the coding or, writing the algorithm. what is left, what is remaining. So I have a question from you all. Devika, can you start the poll? So how often you discuss the edge cases with your interviewer before the coding? Okay, I'm getting the mixed responses. Many of you are responding sometimes or never thought about it or rarely. Yeah, that's also a major gap. So most of the candidates have replied sometimes or rarely. I think that's one of the major problem in coding interviews, that the candidate doesn't just think about the edge cases. They understand the problem, they give the solution of it, but they don't really care about what is the input set. Does it have the integer or not? What is the data type of the input? Does it require equal to comparison or greater than equal to comparison? So these kind of, the basic skill which the interviewer is expecting from all the interviews, especially from the experienced candidates. From the experienced candidates, I think at least at the LinkedIn, and I interviewed for the other good product based companies as well, they explicitly seek for the edge cases handling. The code should handle all the edge cases well. And one of the way I feel the edge cases could be considered in the programming itself is to discuss about it initially while stating the problem. So at the first step, when you are trying to understand the problem, just talk about the input and the output cases and there consider the edge cases so that you can, take care of those cases in your code itself from the beginning. Pawan, what's your thought about this?
Yeah, definitely. Edge cases is something I also feel that most of the candidates miss. And but I would say that should be the something what you should always look for. Like, what are the types of input? If you have integers, okay, what are the various possibilities there? It can be just positive numbers. It can have zero, because division by zero can cause your program to crash. Or it could be negative numbers. Or depending upon what are the allowed inputs, your algorithm also may have to change. So if edge cases is something you should definitely focus on. And these are some of the standard edge cases also you can keep in mind, right? Whenever you look at a problem, start thinking, what if the problem comes as an empty? What if you get a null value there? What if you get, let's say, if it's a string, what if you get some special characters there? What if you get some non-alphabets, etc.? These are actually easy to think, but these are so easy that we miss it to think about it. So this is something we should definitely keep in mind, right? And these edge cases, if you don't catch it, the interviewer will definitely catch it. And that is what that is where I want to take us to the next part, where I want to talk about testing. Like, most of the candidates, what I have seen, they discuss the solution and they write some code for it and they say they are done. But they don't actually dry run the code, or they don't walk through the test cases they might have discussed in the beginning, whether the code passes all of this. And by doing this, you can actually see whether your code is accurate or not, like missing, there may be a less than or less than equal to required in a for loop, which may end up in a totally different results, right? And few of the interviews explicitly ask you to do testing. So that is where, if you have written all the code together, that also becomes a problem, because then you yourself gets confused. Okay, now with the given input value, what happens? I feel when we are writing the code, if we split it into, multiple smaller problems, and it becomes easy to solve, and it becomes easy to read, as well as easy to test, as well as dry run the code. What is your experience here, Deepika?
Very rightly said, Pawan. I experienced this with a few candidates recently only, that they approach the problem rightly. They explain the problem rightly. They give the correct solution when they are, verbally speaking the solution. But when they actually start coding, they mess up the entire thing. One of the main reason is they don't modularize the code, right? and they start looping into the multiple loops, iterations again and again, and this mess up the entire solution, even if they know the solution rightly. And after doing that, when they dry run their code, then they end up in a lot of issues because they themselves are not able to understand that where the control is going. So writing the code in a modular fashion, I think, is very important to make it testable at the later stage of your interview. And many a times the candidate missed to dry run the code. They talked about certain conditions, but in the actual, when writing the code, they somehow missed writing those conditions. And during the dry run, that's the only opportunity to caught those cases. And if they don't caught it, you are right, as an interviewer, we caught it. And that somehow impact their performance in the overall process, specifically for the experienced candidates again, because from the experienced candidate, this is the key skill that we expect them to have hands-on. Now we have talked enough about if you have seen the problem and you have started approaching the problem in a particular manner. But what if the as an interviewee, I have not seen the problem which interviewer is asking me? What is your reaction first? As in when I used to interview, even like few years back, I used to panic. If I don't know the problem, if I have not practiced that problem, I have not heard about it. I think this is where the interview, you know, screwed up entirely. You should not panic, I would say. Even if you have not practiced that particular problem, you have not heard about it, just start understanding the problem step by step. And there, what the brute force approach makes sense to start with, because there is always a way, there is always a brute force approach to solve the problem. Everyone know about it, everyone can solve it in that way, and then slowly gradually we can think about optimizing certain pieces, and that's how the interview could progress. But if you start panicking in the beginning itself, I would say that's end the interview. Many a times I observe the candidates directly say to me, I don't know the answer, please either give me some other problem, or today is not a good day. I think that's not a good attitude as well sometimes. Uh, so always start, composing the problem in a simple manner and think about the solutions. I'm sure if you have practiced enough, you will able to nail it. So, Pawan, did you also observe the similar instances in your?
I've observed as well as gone through the similar instances. So, yeah, definitely panicking is bad. The moment you start panicking, your brain stops working, and yeah, then it's basically the end of your interview there. Instead, yeah, one thing, if you all recollect what Deepika said earlier, interviewers are there to hire you, right? So this is where interviewers will help. Think out loud, like if you look back, all the points we discussed earlier, right? Go through it step by step. Try to clarify the problem in different words. It may give you some idea. Or, think out whatever you're thinking with the brute force solution out loud, and the interviewer may give you some hints, right? Or call it out loud where you are getting stuck, like why are you not able to optimize? And another thing, so all these things will help, and keep calm. uh, Mistakes do happen, but which is okay, but it's always that you should be able to learn from that and adapt when interviewer gives hints. That's also very important thing. So don't panic even if you don't know the thing, but you can just make sure that you speak out loud what you are thinking and what you are not able to figure out, and you may get hints around that. And the whole thing again stems back to sometimes lack of preparation, and it goes back to the last point I think we are planning to discuss today, where is preparing the right skills for going into the interview, right? So now we have abundant resources available on internet. Specifically for coding, you have HackerRank, LeetCode, and similar platforms where you can practice company specific skills questions, and you can also see other candidates who have posted their interview experience, etc., that will help you prepare the specific pattern for the given companies that you are interviewing with. And another aspect also to keep in mind is different companies have different time. So try to, when solving problem, try to keep the time in mind. Like when you are practicing, you either get a 30 minutes or 45 minutes in an interview to understand the problem, come up with a solution, and write code for it. And then you also have to do the dry run. So these are the parts that will be there in a coding round. And this is something you should practice, because just solving a problem on lead code or hacker rank, you will miss out on problem understanding, you will miss out on communicating, you will miss out dry running the code, which is not going to be the case in an actual interview. So do practice all these points. Deepika, you want to add something?
Yeah, so nowadays I think everyone know about it. We have the AI already available to us. So even I think in order to practice, in order to, have the time check, in order to evaluate what you have written, is that the best solution or not? There are the different AI tools integrated in all of these hacker and lead code, all the, interview preparation platforms, which you can leverage and make sure of that whatever you are writing, is that the right thing or there is a better version of it available. So make use of the different AI utilities integrated in all these platforms. You can take the help of your peers, or there are the different platforms which offers mock interview practices. So whenever you are interviewing for a specific company, you always have a time. Nowadays all the companies like Meta, LinkedIn, Google, they give enough time for preparation, so you can practice according to the company by the time, and just try to read through the different resources available in the different channels. At the end, I just wanted to close with a note. Even if one or two interview doesn't go good, don't panic. Don't, discourage yourself. It's the start, and there is always a scope for the improvement. We have shared the few of the observation that we observe in day to day with the candidates when we are interviewing in our organizations, but there could be many more too. So the key essence of succeeding in the coding interviews is to practice a lot, to think about the patterns, to read about the resources specific to the company, and just follow the systematic approach. So I think once you have this recipe, you will be able to clear any coding round. I have seen that there are a few questions posted on the channel. We will try to answer that offline, and there is a Q&A session in the end. We will try to address most of these questions there. So thank you everyone, and over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Deepika, and thank you so much, Pawan. Enlightened, I think interview fear is real, so super, super grateful for breaking it down. Moving on to our next element of this series is designing success. I have with me Narendra Berry and Vineet Goyal. Narinder is a software engineer at Meta, focusing on developing impactful technologies that power the social interactions and scale Meta's vast ecosystem. Vineet is an engineer at LinkedIn. He's a visionary technologist driving design and execution of large-scale engineering solutions for professional networks. So over to the both of you to crack this segment and help our audience.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Sharon. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. In the next 20 minutes, Vineet and I, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to share some best practices we have learned over the years sitting on both sides of the table. And second, we are going to render a mock interview so you can see some of those good and bad practices and uh, see if you can spot some of those while we are rendering this mock interview for you. So let's jump in with the best practices first. Um, the first is structure. The key challenge in system design interviews is that there is so little time and so many thoughts that jump into your head. So have a structure in place when you practice things and follow it thoroughly. And that is what will help you get like avoid getting lost. We're going to showcase that structure in the mock interview we'll render. You can pick that or create one of your own, but it will really help you. Then ask a lot of questions, as Deepika and Pawan were also mentioning, like 5 minutes that you spend initially to gain understanding of what the goals are, rule out any assumptions, ask questions starting with why, like why are we trying to do this? What if the user does this? How many users are there? Like where ask a variety of questions to get a sense of what is it that you're trying to build, and you'll speed up later on. So don't rush through this part of the conversation. The interviewer is not so much interested in what solution you are coming up with, as much as they are in how you approach, how you discuss the trade-offs, how you think. So think out loud. Yeah, this is a very important and helpful strategy, pairing up with structure. So in a system design interview, typically you have a bunch of thoughts coming in your head while you're going through the phases. If any of those thoughts try to hamper or obstruct your flow, it can be helpful to park those thoughts and come back to them once you have a basic design in place and an end-to-end flow working. Of course, if it is something which can be addressed right away, by all means, feel free to do that. This happens a lot of time. I've seen it. And this is like, imagine at some stage in the interview, you say to the interviewer, I'm going to use Kafka, I'm going to use Cassandra. The interviewer comes back to you and says, hey, can you do some data size and request volume calculations? You do that only to discover that the maximum size of data store is required is like in gigabytes, and the request volume is also not that high. Now what happens? Instead of the interviewer getting impressed, mentioning Kafka and Cassandra like this can turn out to be a red flag as well. So it helps to stick with things or technologies or tools you are comfortable with, you can talk about, and if they align with the requirements that you agreed with your interviewer. Instead of trying to just read articles and watch videos on YouTube, it helps a lot if you go and create mini projects on AWS, Azure, or any public cloud. Do that and see if it boosts your confidence. A lot of system design problems or situations ultimately boil down to a handful of patterns, like stateless architectures or stateful actors or queues with worker processes, and so on. Look for patterns and you'll start getting better very fast. Lastly, enjoy the process. If you go to an interview and overthink that you are being judged and evaluated, your best may not come out. Rather, approach it look at it as an opportunity to learn and grow, and you'll do yourself a huge favor. Now we'll move to the next section.
Thanks, Narendra, for the introduction and sharing the approach. So guys, as Narendra talked about, we are doing a kind of like a show and tell of a mock interview. I'll be taking the role of interviewer and Narendra will be taking a role of interviewee. And this is the problem, which is a very generic problem. You would widely see it. You will find a lot of YouTube videos, any online discussions around this question. So basically what we're discussing is every one of us has mostly used bit.ly or tiny URL or something which shortens the URL. Given an original long URL, I want Narendra, you to design a system which will shorten the URL for me. And then once I click on that shortened URL or use that shortened URL, I should be able to get the original URL back.
Thanks, Vineet. Yeah, I have used some of these services in the past. So let's start with gathering requirements, and I'll ask you some questions to understand what we are trying to build. Based on the questions, I could see that there are two primary requirements, like shortening the URL, and then once the system is handed a short URL, we want to we want to retrieve the long URL and hand it back to the user so that potentially the browser can redirect it. Beyond this, I'm also thinking about some foundational um, requirements like privacy and security. For example, we may want to handle malicious URLs and not shorten them. We may also want to prevent bad actors from taking the system down with spam or too many requests. Mm, do you think any of these is something we would want to consider for now?
No, I don't think so. They would take the discussion in a very orthogonal direction. I think the privacy and security bit, we can skip on that.
Sure. I'm also thinking certain ancillary feature beyond the core features, like the user can provide custom short URLs, or we can have certain analytics built on top of the system, so the user can know how many times things are getting their particular short URLs are getting clicked, or maybe features like auto expiration of a URL after a certain period of time or based on some policy. Would you want me to consider any of these features or just stick to the core features?
I think let's pick one of them.
Mhm.
Auto expiration seems to be interesting. Let's try implementing that if possible in our design.
Sure. So I will just add that to the parking space so that I can focus first on the core features, and then we will start thinking about we'll start dealing with that as well once we reach that stage.
Thank you. Pause here. So for everyone here, if you look at it, Narendra did multiple things here in this particular segment. He talked about the core requirements and he verified with the interviewer that these are the core requirements. I think this is good. And then he added, based on his understanding and his build sort of notion, he knows now that, okay, I can extend the system to maybe privacy and security and maybe the other ancillary requirements that he talked about, which is shortening the URL analytics, custom URL, all of those possibilities. And he showcased that he has a breadth and a possible futuristic notion to a particular problem as well. And it's good at this point, it was also good to validate what the interviewer wants truly in terms of requirements. So given that laundry list of requirements, he was able to ascertain that yes, interviewer was looking for only maybe three in this case, two core and one ancillary in my case. And that's how he ended up finalizing on the list of functional requirements that he needs to implement on. Moving on to the next section, which is the non-functional requirements, then take over.
Yeah. So in the non-functional requirements, let's start talking about numbers and the scale so that I can understand what scale we are building for. What do you think will be a good read to write ratio, in the sense, once a short URL has been created, how many times do I expect redirect requests coming for that, which will be read requests primarily?
What do you suggest would that number be?
I'll go with 10 is to 1.
Okay, so generally, if you look at it, any marketing campaign which uses Bitly or TinyURL and any other shortening services, there a marketing campaign would be triggering, will be triggered to multiple users, somewhere around like 10,000. So they might be using the same URL. Do you really think 10 is to 1 is the right answer here? Or do you want to go beyond to 10,000 is to 1?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I'll go with 10 is to 1.
Sure. So let's pause here for a second. For attendees here, if you look at it, there was an assumption that was made. And Narendra did not clarify how and why that assumption is correct. That's a negative in general. So if you're making an assumption, if you are coming from, let's say in this particular case, a background of marketing, or you know about certain situations where Bitly is being used, coming from there and making that assumption does make sense. And it may be wrong. It may be completely wrong. Like, for example, in this case, we are taking 10 is to 1. It could be completely wrong in that sense. If I were to write this whole service for a marketing sort of situation, but It would have helped if you would have checked with me beforehand what kind of situations are we planning to use this sorting service. So for now, I'm going ahead with the assumption that Narendra has already taken. Yeah.
Okay, beyond this, how much, like how many write requests do you expect in the system?
Um, let's say I have somewhere around 100 million sort of per month.
Okay, 100 million shorten requests per month.
Yes, it's
So
the right
based
request.
on that, I have done some request velocity calculations. I can see that with 100 million requests per month, it would amount to a rate of 30 shorten requests coming in per second. And for redirect, it's 10 times because the read to write ratio is 10:1. So 300 requests per second for write. So the total QPS I am considering is 330. That gives me a sense of what kind of patterns I need to use. Had the request rate been far more than that, I probably would have required to pull a different set of patterns altogether.
Sure, makes sense.
Yeah. Uh, I'll also do some data size calculations so that we can see how much capacity we need in the data store. Um, Based on the inputs that we like the numbers that we discussed, I can see that for 100 million a month URL records, it boils down to 1.2 billion records in a year. And if I consider 10 years, it's roughly 12 billion records. If I consider 10% growth year on year in the usage of the service, still it's in the same ballpark, like 20 billion records. And now let's do two things. One is the like what kind of what's the space that we need for the short URL stub. If I do a quick calculation, I can see that with 7 places in the short URL stub, I'll be able to generate 3 trillion possibilities using a base 62 encoding, of course, which has 62 characters. And that gives us quite a lot of room to expand as well. Also, if I consider 2000 bytes per URL record, since all the records will not be the maximum URL length that is possible, average, let's say 2000 bytes, um, and some metadata along with that, I I think 40 terabytes is a ballpark figure in terms of the storage size required.
Looks correct to me, I think. Let's pause here for a second. So for everyone, if you look at it, there's a bunch of calculations that happen in this section. And what we are trying to ascertain is what would be the total data size or data storage requirements in a rough sense, of course. And then what would be the rough sense, what would be the QPS? Again, some calculations might seem daunting. For example, in this particular case, 62 raised to power 7 could not be calculated in any way or form in general during an interview. You can ask for a calculator's help, and if the interviewer is okay, it's fine. If not, you can make an assumption here that you can extrapolate from 62, let's say 100. So your 100 raised to power 7 would translate to 10 raised to power 14, which will still give you in the ballpark of trillion possibilities. And hence you can still make an assumption from that sense, and that assumption will still come back to, again, a 7 spaces or stub. Okay. The idea is not to find the right answer here. The idea is still be very approximately correct in that sense. Moving further, Nanda, can you take over?
Yeah, should I also discuss availability, consistency, and some of those non-functional requirements because they are very core?
I would love to, the because of the time is short. Let's skip it for now. But in general, for attendees, it is also good to check on the efficiency of the platform that you need, availabilities, what are the spike and the peak patterns of access, and all of those are good points of discussion that you would want to cover. But again, keep a time management and the structure here that helps as well, that you want to spend only maybe 5 minutes on doing all of these calculations and everything. And we are limiting, because of our limited time, we are limiting this to only data storage as well as the QPS for now.
Sure. So I'll try to be quick. I'll take a quick minute to define the public APIs
Sure.
because the system, the components, the arrangement of the components within the system can change and evolve. But hopefully, the public APIs should stay the same, and they also get us on the same page that, hey, this is what we are designing for. So in this case, I'm seeing two APIs, shorten and like get me back the original URL. I think the first API will have one parameter and the second two. As we evolve, we can add more parameters.
Got it. So this exactly is looks good as it is, but for attendees here, if you look at it, Narendra has chosen gRPC style interfacing here, and because he was more familiar with it, and it is completely fine to also go with REST if you are familiar with it. The idea is more towards using the techniques that you are familiar with, and not going ahead with, let's say, for example, your experience is more in REST architecture and REST style of interfaces, and you start thinking in gRPC world, you will end up causing problems for yourself over the tenure of this interview. It's better to stick to whatever your strengths are. So hence, in this particular case, I'm completely fine with using a gRPC style of interfacing.
Cool. So I'll move ahead to drawing the high level design, and I'll go with a microservice architecture. In this case, I I like the requirements are pretty simple and they can be served using microservice architecture, which I'm more familiar with. I have an option of using event driven architecture as well, but I don't see any stateful workflow here, so I'm not going to use that.
Sure.
It's all about the big picture. So uh, I'm going to have a URL shortener service, which is going to handle both the responsibilities of shortening and um, getting me back the original URL. And it'll have a backing data store, which will store the URL mapping.
Got it. How will you shorten the URL though? What is the algorithm that you're using?
Yes, I have been thinking about it. Is it okay if I park it for now, just to make sure that I'm not rabbit holed into that conversation? So I have a few options in mind, but trade-offs as well. It will help if I can first showcase the end-to-end flow working, and then we can discuss this in detail.
Sure. And actually, that works for me. Thank you for doing that. Pause for a minute. So if you look at it, here a choice was being made whether to go with microservices or event-driven architecture, and the candidate, Narendra in this case, clearly justified that choice, saying that there is no stateful. In general, this is a golden rule that we follow, that if you are doing some sort of a stateful system architecture, you will end up being more comfortable in an event-driven architectural style. And in general, microservices ends up being the default choice for everyone, more or less. But just for those specific problem statements, you might find event-driven architecture working very beautifully. So for now, I think he made a great choice, and he clearly justified that with reasonings that he already stated. And then the parking model, again, he's continuing with that. It's completely fine. In certain cases, interviewer might ask you to go deeper onto that, depending on what's the style that the interviewer has. But I'm okay with it for now, and it's completely fine to do that.
Okay, let's talk about the data model and the schema quickly, and hopefully get quickly to the deep dives.
Done.
So I'm able to see one core table which stores the URL mapping along with some metadata. Like we have the original URL, the short stub, and we can store the creation date and last access date, which can help us in expiration, or the policies that we decide to evict those URLs from the database. We can also add more things in it, like a custom short URL, or actually that can be the URL, the short stub itself. But this is the core data model for now.
Yeah, this looks fine, but why this primary key? Can you state some reasons?
Yeah, so I am looking at the core query pattern, and uh, the second functionality, which is given a short URL stub, we want to get back the original URL. That query pattern needs, like that query pattern is what is leading me to have a primary key built on the short URL stub. I can also see that the combination of URL, original URL and short stub will be unique. So I can choose that as well. But just for simplicity and meeting my requirements, I am sticking with short stub. I'll revisit it if something else jumps to my head.
Oh, Uh, thanks for doing that. I think this completely makes sense. For attendees here, if you look at it, in the first statement, he made a choice, gave the primary key directly, but didn't state any reason for it. And hence, that is slightly negative. I would not say a complete negative, and hence the interviewer had to ask the reasoning behind it. It would have been good to state that while primary key was being shared with the interviewer directly. But again, it's completely fine to park all of these discussions like he has done again. It's completely fine to do that. Narendra, can you run me through a user journey quickly?
Yes, let's do that because that's where we are trying to get to. So the purpose of this user journey end-to-end flow is to see whether a basic flow is in place. And I can see when when a user sends a request to shorten, we will generate a short stub, we will store it in the data store. And when a user asks for the original URL back, we will again go back to the same service and we will retrieve the mapping from the data store. So it looks like it is working, but I'm starting to wonder that when a request comes for shortening, instead of always generating a short URL short stub, should I first be checking in the data store if a mapping for that original URL already exists? And I'm also wondering if I should do that only in case a user is logged in. Like for logged in users, give this feature that, hey, for a given long URL, you get only one short URL. You don't just need to create new short URLs. But if the user is not logged in and we don't know who the user is, for that we can probably create a short stub every time. I'm wondering about that now.
I I think I'm okay with the simplistic approach that you already stated for now, and let's not go deeper into the complicated aspect of it. So it's completely fine to have a short stub directly present as it is. So thanks for doing that. And for attendees here, if you look at it, he gave an option or rather a new twist on the requirement set. Ideally, you would want these discussions to happen at the beginning once you have started gathering the requirements. This question should have come in at that point as well. Now, this late in a stage, it's good to share, yes, but what it does now is that it can derail the whole conversation into a very different direction, and you might end up, you know, patching whatever you have said in the past, different sections that we have just discussed. So it's better to discuss all of these requirements earlier, and if you believe that there is something that you have come out during the interview and you want to change something, ensure that you will have to deal with the other subsequent questions around, oh, will it change the non-functional requirements? All of those questions will have to come back again. So it's better to stick to the original core requirements and the stated requirements. But again, your choice on that. It might come out as a negative in general for the interview. Okay, let's look at the part questions that we talked about and deep
Absolutely,
dive on that.
absolutely. So the first one is auto expiration. Like we can build this feature, and in order to build this feature, I would introduce a new service, and what it will do is it's a periodic cleanup service. It will it will have the policies and the configurations, like whether you want to expire on the basis of creation time or on the basis of the last access time or something else, and periodically it'll run and just delete those entries from the data store which match the policy configuration.
What are the other options of implementing, such as?
Another option can be to use TTL configurations in a data store. Like a lot of databases give this feature out of the box to attach a time to live to a record. And when that is met, the database itself will clean that entry.
I think I'm fine with this one. I think it's completely
Yeah.
okay
Let's
with.
jump to the next topic in the deep dives, which is shortening algorithm. There are a bunch of options to shorten. One option is to use an auto increment ID. Like the databases provide you 1, 2, 3. It just keeps going on every time you create a new record. It gives you a new one, and then encode it into, let's say, base 62. Another option is to take the URL and apply some hashing algorithm on top of it, and take a slice of the output. Like if the hashing algorithm gives you a longer string than what you need, then just take a slice of it. Now there are trade-offs to both of these options. Like the auto increment, one of the challenges is that in a distributed environment with deployments globally, it can be tricky to manage that kind of a configuration. Also, it is prone to information leaks. Like you can easily decode the base 62 string and get back the integer. So it can lead to subtle forms of information leak. And that is one. The hashing one is like, it is prone to collisions. Like the different URLs can generate the same hash. So that is something which will have to be dealt with. And an option is you can try and try again. A third option that jumps to mind is completely random, like the first to have some determinism sort of built in. We can generate a random 7-character ID, or generate a GUID and take a slice like 7 characters out of it and use that. Now, this is completely random. There is no determinism or no guessability attached with the original URL. The challenge here also is that we will end up, we may have to try again in case there are collisions. So my recommendation will be that if the latency and performance requirements are not that stringent, I would go with the third option. Yes, I will have to try maybe once or more. I can have monitoring built on top of it to see if the collisions are quite a lot and they are hampering the latency and performance requirements. If the performance requirements are stringent, then I would go with an option like this, where I would generate the keys, the unique 7-character keys, in a pre-cooked fashion with another service, and that service can make those keys available to the URL shortener service. It's ready to be consumed, so that the hot path is just very, very quick, and there is some determinism in that.
Cool. Pausing here a bit. So if you look at it, we did 2 deep dives. I don't know whether we have time for the third one as well, but we'll see. The first deep dive, he gave an option. He made a choice directly and didn't give an option at all. So we, as an interviewer, had to ask again, what are other options? And again, he shared the other options, but again, did not discuss why one over the other was chosen in this particular scenario. In the second shortening algorithm case, he clearly stated all the possible options, the trade-offs, what are the pros and cons, etc., and made a choice. Again, you could have chosen in any of the options. It's completely fine. There are pros and cons. And what you're trying to showcase is the depth and the breadth that you have for each of the options that you talked about. In this particular case, he's gone with one and he's clearly justified that choice. It's a great example of stating that all of the experience that you have in building, this comes very handy in this particular situations. Thank you for doing that. Narendra, I think we are running short of time, so let's not pick up the deep dive on the primary key. But if you have anything quickly, can you share?
Yeah, so I thank you so much for the learning experience, Vineet. I think I wish I would have taken more time to clarify the requirements in the beginning. It was a great learning experience being interviewed by you.
Thank you. I think the next slide contains the resources that we believe would be helpful for everyone here. ChatGPT being the golden for us and for everyone as well. Feel free to look through them, and they should help you in figuring out what the interviewer wants and what the interviewee needs to do in different designing interviews. Thanks for sharing your time with us. And for any question and answer, again, similar to the Vikas session, we will answer them offline, and we'll also dig them in the Q&A session as well. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Vineet, and thank you, Narinder. Oh man, that was a really tough interview. It felt like an actual interview, and I was sweating halfway through, wondering if the candidate will get through or not. Anyway, to the last but not the least, the human factor of all interviews. We are still not at a space that we are using ChatGPT to code out every single solution. So we have with us two engineering leaders, Bijal Parekh and Gaurav Salia, who are both from LinkedIn, working on absolutely brilliant projects, innovative features, running high-performing engineering teams, shaping the future of how LinkedIn's professional ecosystem looks like. So over to the both of you to talk a little bit more into what do you as hiring managers at the end want from your candidates and what do you look for?
Thanks, Sharon. So hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time for joining this session. Hope it benefits a lot of you. So to begin with, there is a quick poll question that I have. I just want to understand like how many of you all have clarity on how to prepare for the hiring manager module during interviews. And also like if you can let me know via chat, what are the areas that you typically focus on during this prep? Do we have the poll results yet? Okay, looks like 85% of you don't know what to expect from the HM round. Hoping this session will be very enlightening for you all. So throughout this session, Gaurav and I have a lot of actionable talking points that we will be sharing with you, which will help you ace this round as well. But to begin with, Gaurav, very quickly, if you can help tell us like why is this round even important? Because if candidates are clearly acing the technical coding and design rounds, then why do companies even take this in the first place?
Very good way to start the discussion, Bijal. I feel, especially being in the tech world, a lot of us are very comfortable with technical aspects, but the non-technical aspects, often referred to as soft skills, I think of them as hard skills, not because they are difficult, but it's something that we don't pay conscious attention to, and hence requires some effort to get better at and master. Given that we work with other people, the non-technical aspects are equally important. And in this discussion, we can probably touch upon three key areas that should come out really well in the hiring manager round. There would be communication, collaboration, and leadership. As you do grow up in your career, the ability to influence others also becomes important, depending on the time we may touch upon it.
Yeah, thanks, Gaurav. So I completely agree. I think the hiring manager module actually can be a deal breaker for many candidates. So there were a few that I interviewed in the past. They aced all the technical rounds, but they did not end up getting the offer because something went wrong in the hiring manager module. And like Gaurav said, right? So the three key things that people usually look for are good communication, collaboration, and leadership. So let's dig into the first one of that, which is communication. So Gaurav, what can candidates do to not mess up their communication during this round?
Let me start with at least talking about why communication is important. Given that we do work with a lot of other people, the ability to convey your thoughts clearly and crisply is very important with your teammates, with your partners, stakeholders, leads, all of them. And that also is reflected in the hiring manager round where we look for certain things in terms of how our candidates able to communicate. One of the main things is clarity of thought. Most of you will be asked to talk about the project that you worked on. And let's take a very simple example. If the project or the task was, you say, I've added alerts and built a dashboard on top of it, instead of that, use some framework. STAR framework is a good example where you first talk about the situation. What was the task that came out of that situation, the action taken to fix the task, and then what was the result? Translating the previous example using the STAR method, let's say if your customers are complaining about the stability of your system, that's the situation. The task could be you look into how do we add alerts so that the team is notified beforehand. The action was adding the alerts and then building a Grafana dashboard on top of it. And the result would be now the team is able to catch the alerts sooner so that your users don't complain about it. You are able to find out before they do. This helps provide the context to the manager and adds more details about why the project was important, what was the impact. That's what we are really looking for instead of a list of tasks. Something else that you should do is, as you're talking about the project, if there are multiple things that you want to talk about, managers would not know where the discussion is going. It's the first time that they're hearing about the project. Do take a pause or time check in between and ask them the three different areas, which one would you like me to talk about first? that gives the manager two option to pick what they think is important, and you can drive the discussion accordingly. A few areas where I feel that candidates can do better and often end up, taking steps that can hurt them. One is speaking very little, and like if you just say one sentence and stop. As a manager, I do not know, is it because you don't know enough about the project, or you're waiting for me to prompt you? Now, some managers may prompt you, others may not. They'll just think that this is all that you know and move on. So it creates an impression that you don't want them to have. The other is talking about things that different people have worked on and not really you. The interview is about you. So it's okay to provide some context, but really focus on things that are done by you. Not managing your time well, rabbit holing and going into things or jumping between multiple things leads to confusion and wastage of time. Then integrity is also something that is important, I feel. Do not bring up things that can come across as either you're misrepresenting facts or making false claims that can create an impression which can be quite severe. And last thing I would say, going by this, is being flexible. Manage your time well as be open to, you may have rehearsed that this is all that I'm going to say about my project, but if something takes a long time, then it's okay to skip a few things and then move on. So go for quality over quantity.
All great insights. I especially loved the template that you spoke about, which is the STAR template. I think a lot of junior engineers, especially, they struggle a lot with kind of giving a structure to their thought, and they're just all over the place. So I highly recommend like it to people, just look up the STAR template on Google and then practice it whenever possible. It's a great way to communicate your thoughts.
And Bijal, I would love to hear your thoughts about collaboration. What are some of the things that people can talk about that bring out the collaboration aspect?
Yeah, sure. So you spoke, right, that in hiring manager module, candidates typically describe at least one project that they've worked on. So what I would recommend is when you're describing the project, just highlight any collaboration touch points you've had throughout the journey of that project. So let's say that you just got some requirements, and to clarify the requirements, maybe you've collaborated with the product manager, or you've collaborated with a UX designer to sort of finalize the UI mocks. If it's a feature that requires heavy scaling, maybe you discussed it with some engineer from the infra team. So how did you go about collaborating with all of them, getting alignments is a great point to add in your hiring manager module. So moving on, right, like once the requirements are completely clarified, you typically move into the development phase. So let's say that you're working in a group of 3 engineers, or even better, if you are the person who led the entire project, discuss like how did you go about breaking down the project into smaller parts and divided it among all the team members. How were you on top of project tracking? Like, did you use Excel sheets? Did you use Jira tickets? Great ways to share how to go about project tracking. If you are a UI engineer and you're working with a backend engineer and then you want to integrate some features, if you've created like an integration test plan, highlight those. I think that is another way in which you can show how you go about collaborating with others. So this is just all about like once how you're working on a project. Additionally, at the end of the project, I see a lot of engineers, they'll conduct retrospectives. So retros are like a great way for you to learn like what went well during the duration of the project and then what you could have done better. So if you are regularly doing retros during your day-to-day at your work, do share that in the HM round. And last but not the least, one thing that I would say is an important point to showcase is your conflict resolution skills. So as an engineer, there'll be many situations where you have disagreement. So let's say you are writing code, and especially in product companies, I know they follow like a very exhaustive code review culture. And if you're getting a lot of review comments that are not in agreement with what you have written, do you use any standard well-defined process to go about getting alignment? Then share those. Similarly for designs as well, right? Like if you're working on one particular design and engineers from the other team don't agree to it, how did you go about getting the alignment? Did you use like any data-driven approach? Did you like write down these are the pros of this approach, this is the cons of this approach? Great to share with your manager in the interview. And for senior engineers, right? Like I see some senior engineers use well-defined processes like a rapid process. So I don't know if you're aware about rapid, but it's a very well industry-defined process which helps you gain alignment, especially when two teams or two parties are not in agreement. So if you're using it on a day-to-day basis, do share it in the HM round. I think these are all great collaboration points.
Awesome, Bijal. +1 to being data driven, I would say, not just for conflict resolution, but bring that aspect out in other talking points during the interview too. Generally, being able to back something by data goes a long way. And I really like, Bijal, how you touched upon retrospective aspect of doing that also shows a growth mindset. When things are not going well, or even when they are going well, you're constantly looking at what can be done better or what we should continue doing.
Yep. I think if you show that you have a growth mindset, you're winning half the battle there in the HM round. But to me, like, growth mindset is a sign of leadership. And that is the third tenet that you touched upon, right? Communication, collaboration, and leadership. So Gaurav, can you tell us, like, how can candidates show leadership during this round?
Leadership comes in various shapes and forms. It's not necessarily about leading a group of people or leading a project. We'll touch upon a few different aspects that convey leadership. The first one, which I feel is the most important, is showing ownership. And given that it's a vague concept, let me try to put some premise to it. Let's say if you're the founder of a startup and you've built a product, you would be really passionate about the product and look at every single aspect of it. That to me is ownership. You're not just looking at tasks or features, but are the features useful? Is the product scaling well? Like, what are the hiccups or issues that our customers are running into? Now, depending on the work or the task that you're doing, you can display ownership in many different forms. Let's say if there's been an issue, did you proactively look into figuring out how important is this? And if it is important, raise it to your manager or your leadership chain to say that this should be funded. And again, use data-driven approach to justify why it should be done that way. Raise blockers if there's a change in scope of the project, if new asks have come in. Again, don't just silently take it, but bring it up, do some analysis, and leverage your leads or managers to figure out what should be picked up. Keeping your stakeholders and partners informed about the project status is also a form of ownership, where you really care about not just working on things, but taking your partners and stakeholders along with you on the journey. The other aspect would be mentorship. And if you don't have the opportunity to mentor new engineers, that's also fine. Helping others in your team for the areas where you have some expertise is also a good way of showing how you can help the team and you're a team person. The third part would be, how do you do prioritization? And if you're not clear, ask your leads about it. That way you are able to connect what you are working on to why is it important, and it can help you figure out how do you make these decisions on your own. The signal it conveys is, again, the growth mindset, wherein you are becoming more and more independent and you have a sense of what should be picked up versus what can be done later. The last part that I would say is, don't be afraid to share things where you have been unsuccessful. They say that it took 10 years to become an overnight success. And invariably, everybody goes through phases where things don't work out well. We are all humans. It is expected. Nobody's perfect. What is important, though, is when things do not work as you planned, what were the learnings that came out of it? And how did you incorporate them to get better at things? That's probably a key aspect as well.
Yeah, thanks, Gaurav. Like, great points. So to just add on to that, right? Successful people, they always say that I hire smart people because I want them to find problems for me rather than me finding the problems, then asking them to solve. So the point that you mentioned, right? Like, if candidates can share examples where they themselves are finding out like what's wrong with their current team, and then if they get it prioritized to be solved, I think it's an excellent leadership point. So yeah, +1 to that. But again, so I think, yeah, like, to everyone, I would just say that just focus on good communication, collaboration, and leadership. We can see the next slide where we've given bullets for whatever we just discussed. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me and Gaurav during the Q&A section. And yeah, feel free to even post questions on the Q&A chat box. Thanks. Over to you, Sharon.
Very quick call out to Bijal. Since we did talk about being flexible as one of the things, she displayed it and demonstrated it really well here. We had other things to talk about, but because of time constraint, we had to cut short, and she was quickly able to adapt. So awesome, Bijal.
Thanks, Gaurav.
That, I think, was great camaraderie. Thank you, Gaurav and Vijal, for doing that segment. Now let's move on to what we've been waiting for very diligently, which is Ask the Expert section. I have with me Ankit, who will be moderating this questions that is being asked. Ankit is a staff software engineer at LinkedIn working on the consumer and growth products that we built. So over to you, Ankit, to direct questions that we have in the Q&A tab. Some of the questions have been already answered async, so please take note of that and read through those responses. But over to you, Ankit.
Thanks, Sharon, and thank you to all the panelists for talking and sharing great insights. So I'll be going through the questions, going across panelists and asking you some of these. First one to Deepika. So, and this is, I think, top of mind for everyone. So Pushpa has a question where she's asking, like, how do you think the landscape of coding interviews is changing, especially with the rise of LLMs, which are being able to write code which is syntactically correct? Do we anticipate it to get to a level where interviews would be given tools to solve a problem, like quickly looking up at the internet, where they don't have to do much and just take help of LLMs? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Pushpa, for asking this question. So today I feel the interviews are mostly focusing on testing the algorithmic thinking and coding under the time constraints. But with the advent of the LLM, I feel the focus will be shifting to how well the problem is understood and decomposed. So you might have seen in many of the product-based companies, the solution is simple, but the problem is outlined as a story most of the times. So here, what the interviewer is expecting from you is how you understand the problem, how you figure out that what has to be solved. This is something which I feel the today the landscape of the interviews is changing in that direction. Another thing, I think with the advent of the LLM, the quality of the approach that you are suggesting in the interview, how performant that is, how scalable that is, how it can, adapt the future input sets, that will be more emphasized on. For example, this is you all are the seasoned engineers in your respective organization. You might have seen that in most of the interview, the kind of problem today asked is, okay, give me the sorting algorithm for this, or sort these arrays, or give me the approach to sum up these integers, something like that. But these are not the real problems which we face in day-to-day programming in our jobs. So I think the interview pattern will soon be shifting to address those areas where the real world problems will be given to the candidates and they are asked to think about the solutions for it. So that's totally different the way we practice today in our lead code hackerland. So I think with LLM this could also be another shift. Another I have seen in some of the companies, they have already started doing it. They give us the LLM generated code and they ask us to fix it. They ask us to improve it. They ask us to figure out the issues in them. And with the change in the scope, how can we modify this code? So that could be another way to judge the candidates in future. And one of the company, I heard from one of my friend, they have started doing the pair programmings. So their interviewer is doing the pair programming with the interviewee, and they are solving the real problems they get in their organization day-to-day basis. So I think the landscape would surely change. It has already been started in many of the companies, and I'm hoping like within a few couple of years, the change would happen from algorithmic thinking as well as the coding in the time constraint to these patterns. Pawan, would you like to add anything to that?
No, definitely. Like, I think you covered most of it, but few of the companies, as you mentioned, have already started shifting it from pure DSA rounds to pair programming or similar rounds where you can access the internet and search, except they don't allow LLM yet, from what I know. But that said, that is something that may come in the future. But what said, one thing that remains is the understanding of why the solution works. That is still important, even if the LLM can give you the code. It may not be always correct, or you should be able to say why it is correct, or you should be able to say why it is the most optimized solution. That will still be important.
And one thing is always we should keep in mind that LLMs are responding based on the training data, and the training data is provided by us only. So that should not be considered as a source of truth always. We should be always mindful about the response that LLM is generating out of our queries. And it also depends on the prompts that we are giving to the LLM models. What, for the same problem, let's say if the two people are giving the prompt, it can generate different answers. So we should be mindful about using these AI technologies in solving our day-to-day problems.
All right. Hope that answers the question. Thanks, Deepika and Pawan. Moving on to the next one. This is for Vineet by Simranpreet. For experienced candidates, what are the key differences in system design interviews that are observed to make them stand out?
So as an interviewer, I can easily state that if you're an experienced candidate, you will find the breadth and the depth much more bigger. Like in this particular example that we took in the mock round, then Narendra was able to pick out that there's a privacy and security concern. Normally, if you are not experienced, you will not be going in that direction completely. So you would miss out on that. Similarly, the discussions around reader versus write QPS, why and how to justify that, you will find much depth in all the experienced interviewees compared to the freshers in general. So all of the choices would be much more scrutinized, and they would be able to truly justify any of the choices that they have made. And that's what sets the difference between experienced candidate and a non-experienced candidate. So you would see the depth plus this horizontal vision overall on where this platform can land in future, where all of those directions that I think one good example that Narendra also took was around user ID and then user specific custom URLs and all of those. So it's a very different orthogonal direction, not at all related to this interview question, but was able to envision that this platform can move in that direction. All of those pointers kind of showcases that the person has a vision for every platform, or at least the platform that is being asked to design. And that's what's the key in this case. Narendra, feel free to add more if you
I'll
have.
just say one line on top of what you said. It's wording it differently. Like, apart from wearing the engineering hat, the more experienced a person is, they will wear the product hat and think from product perspective, the business hat, think from business perspective, and then tie the product, business, and engineering together to align all of those and have those kind of engineering solutions.
Yeah, plus one to that. I hope that answers Simranpreet. Moving on. This one is for Bijal from Amrita. So she's asking that during HM interviews, when I discuss about past projects, I just say I built so and so feature. This is where the requirement was, and these are things that were implemented and the tech stack used. And she might end up doing all these things in 30 seconds, while the project might have been done in months or quarters and so on. And it feels like, oh, was there any complexity to what I talked about or not? So how do I prepare that pitch?
Okay, so I think when you're describing a project, one thing that I see candidates do most often is they just talk about like what were the technical wins or what were the technical challenges they faced. So like I mentioned, use the star template, right? Like, so just describe the project requirement and talk a little bit about what the technical challenges were, but maybe even describe like what were the collaboration challenges and highlight that it was a 3-quarter long effort. And this was the most challenging part. So let me give you an example, right? So let's say that you were working on a migration project and maybe you collaborated with 3 other teams. So a good way to say is that one of the problems that my organization was facing was that the tech stack was very outdated. So I and X number of other engineers went about migrating that service from tech stack A to tech stack B. In the process, we collaborated with 3 other teams. Now, my contribution to it was I designed so and so, and these were the latency wins, or maybe these were like whatever developer productive wins that we got. This project was X months or maybe a year long. The key challenge I faced during collaboration is that getting alignment was an issue, but I used so and so processes, blah, 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 to get the alignment. And in the end, call out the impact. I think that is also important. So if you do this, it should be fine. It should give you a pitch for at least 3-4 minutes. And then follow up by saying, is there anything specific you would like to know? Because like Gaurav highlighted, right? It's maybe a good thing to talk like 2-3 minutes, but ask the interviewer, like, what is it explicitly in the project that they would want to know more? And you can just go about it. Gaurav, feel free to add anything else if you want to this one.
You covered it well, Vijay.
Cool. Moving on, Pawan, I'm putting it to you. So this is one of the questions by Sakshi. She's asking that in a coding interview, we have a limited time, right? 45 minutes or so. And how do you divide that time in asking clarifying questions, telling different approaches, dry running, and then coming up with the code, as well as if they face any new problem, because it takes time to understand. So what are your thoughts?
I mean, one thing is, yeah, 45 minutes is limited. So there is only so much you can do in that time. So probably you can try to time box yourself. That said, if you don't understand the question, then you cannot go and solve it, right? So let's say you just time boxed yourself to 5 minutes understanding the question, that is not sufficient. But that said, if you understand the question, then you should probably time box yourself to so and so. Like dry running the code will at least take you 5 minutes, because you will be writing at least some 100 lines of code probably. And then you will have to take an example and walk through it. Probably walk through it aloud with the interviewer, so that they also understand what you are trying to do and your thought process. Try to time box it, but that said, if you are not sure what the question is asking, then you have to ask the clarifying question. So then you can try to communicate, but do keep in mind of the time you spent on understanding the question, and based on that you can think through the next steps. This is where practice helps. If you had practiced along with looking at time, you know that, okay, this is the kind of solution you take this much time to code. And if you're already familiar, then probably it's just depends on typing the code, right? Yeah, there is no specific rule as this is the time you should allot for each of these things, but that is something you should keep in mind based on your comfortability level and based on what you find during your practice. Deepika or others can add.
Yeah, I would like to add one more point here. So let's say if you have not seen the problem in the past and you are trying to understand it, try to decompose the problem into different sub-modules. Maybe you know the answer of some of the parts, you may not know the answer of some of the remaining parts. So at least you can start talking about something which you have understood and for which you know something related. You can start talking about that, and that will give you a little bit of confidence. And instead of saying that you don't know anything, it's better to say something which is related to that sub module. And maybe it practically happens that when the candidate gains some confidence discussing about some of the modules, the interviewer is also tend to help in the other remaining parts, and they can give you the direction to work on those remaining sub modules. In that way you can solve the entire problem in entirety.
Makes sense. And just like to add, like 45 minutes is not always standard. Some companies expect that you solve 2 questions in 1 hour, or so. Do understand what are the round you're interviewing for from the recruiter, what is expectation, and then prepare accordingly. The difficulty of the question will also depend on the time that is allocated to you, so you can attempt and time box your efforts accordingly. Moving on, this is question from Smita. I'm asking it for Gaurav, and others can chime in. I think this applies for everyone. How can we handle the pressure of big companies interview? Sometimes even if you know the answer, but because of pressure, you might rush to the solution or become nervous or forget some points. How do you tackle that situation?
Smita, great call out, and there's no silver bullet to it. I think most of us do experience it in different situations. What I would say is try to have mock interviews with your friends or even your anybody you're comfortable with. That sort of helps you practice it better. And sometimes during interviews, it's okay to say if you're nervous. We can just call it out if you're really nervous that, hey, I am nervous. If I do fumble or if I do make mistakes, please excuse me. And then the interviewer should help you relax a little bit. and then figure out what works for you to be a little bit more relaxed in these situations. It could be different for everybody, but taking deep breaths helps. And I think if others would like to chime in, then do. But I do want to call out that it's a very real thing. No one fix to it.
Yeah. And I think a follow-up from her, which is related, that what to do if they don't have any idea about the question asked or have partial answer of the question asked, how to take it there.
The answer to here would be different if it is for coding, design, or the hiring manager round. I don't think we can just give a generic answer here.
Would folks want to chime in, Narendra? From design aspect, if you want to call out.
Sorry, I was busy typing.
Yeah, but the question is like how to handle when they don't have idea about the question that is asked, or have a partial understanding of the question, how to attempt that in the interview.
Well, if you like, you can look at it from the goal perspective that, hey, my goal is to clear the interview, or you can look at it from, hey, I'm just getting in an interview to understand and improve my process of taking the interview. I have this habit of looking at it from the latter perspective. So in that situation, I'll just enjoy the struggle in those 45 minutes and hopefully come out with something. Like, I can try articulating to the interviewer what I'm understanding, what I'm not, and see if they can give me some hints. But more importantly, just struggling in that situation will, and being comfortable with that discomfort, is what people say, is what is going to help you build up for many such situations which may show up.
Correct. Anything else? Otherwise, I think we have time. I can head off to Sharon.
Yes, I know there are still questions unanswered. So, folks on our panel, if you guys want to just type in the answers to whatever questions you can, please do that. But thank you so much, team. Absolutely fabulous discussions. I want to first and foremost thank the panelists who took their time out to spend 2 hours with us, just educating folks and bringing them to understanding that today interviews have become more discussional than it was earlier, and practice is what makes you perfect. So thank you so much for indexing on these aspects.